The UAP Herald. Case File 026. The Absurd Conjecture. I want to start with the document itself. Not with a sighting, not with a photograph, not with a radar track. I want to start with a piece of paper that arrived on the desks of the CIA, the State Department, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the National Security Resources Board on the last day of July 1950. It is a cover sheet, an information report, and it carries a subject line that must have caught someone's eye.
German scientist article on flying discs.
The report number is SODB 27143. The country of acquisition is listed as Chile and Germany. The place acquired Santiago, Chile. The date of the information prior to mid-1950. And the cover sheet tells us exactly what this is.
Attached for your information is a copy, in translation, of an article submitted by Dr. Eduard Ludwig for publication in Condor, a German-language magazine published in Chile.
So this is not a field agent's sighting report. This is not a debriefing of a pilot or a radar operator. This is a translated magazine article, an opinion piece, written by a self-identified German aerodynamics engineer living in Santiago, and forwarded by the CIA's station there for informational purposes only. The cover sheet carries a classification, restricted, and it carries a grading. The source, the person who provided this article, is rated A, completely reliable. But the content of the article itself is rated 5, probably false. The collector who handled this document believed the source was trustworthy, but what the source was saying was almost certainly not true. And then, in handwriting, across the bottom of the cover page, someone, an analyst, a reviewer, has scrawled a note. It reads, in a looping cursive,
"Good report but faulty translation."
And beside that, another handwritten annotation, longer, more considered, summarizing what the reviewer took to be the core idea.
The significant conclusion drawn by the scientist in this report is that the old handicap of boundary layer on a moving object or airfoil has been inverted to produce an advantageous reaction and is the factor controlling the success of the flying saucers type of airfoil.
So before we even read the article, we know the institutional verdict. The CIA thought this was probably false. The translation was faulty. But someone still thought it was a good report, interesting enough to annotate, to summarize, to distribute to 5 major branches of the US government. And the idea at its heart was that the flying saucer was not a craft from another world, but a piece of advanced human engineering, exploiting a quirk of aerodynamics that had been studied in Germany for decades. This is the honest frame. I am not going to tell you that this document proves anything about unidentified flying objects. There is no craft described here. There is no photograph. There is no photograph. There is no witness to any object. What we have is a single engineer's argument, written in a German-language magazine in Chile, translated and filed by the CIA, and graded probably false by the very people who collected it. The mystery, if there is one, is not in the sky. It is in the paper. It is in the man who wrote it, the names he invokes, the history he claims, and the quiet, bureaucratic act of filing it away. Before we go any further, I want to hold the document itself up to the light. Not the article, the cover sheet. Because the cover sheet is a machine, it is a piece of bureaucratic engineering, and it tells us exactly how this information moved through the American intelligence system in the summer of 1950. The form is a standard CIA information report, and its architecture is rigid. At the top, the subject line, German scientist's article on flying discs. Below that, a report number, SODB 27143, and a distribution date, the 31st of July 1950. The country of acquisition is listed as Chile and Germany. The place acquired Santiago. The date of the information is prior to mid-1950. And then a field for the number of enclosures, 1. That one enclosure is the translated article. Now look at the routing. A row of checkboxes, State, Army, Navy, Air, and NSR. B, the first 4 are self-explanatory. The 5th, NSRB, is the National Security Resources Board. a Cold War agency created in 1947 to plan for industrial mobilization in the event of war. That this report went to the NSRB tells you something. It was not just an intelligence curiosity. It was being routed to the people whose job was to think about the industrial and technological capacity of potential adversaries. A flying disc, if real, was a resource question. Then the grading. The CIA of this era used a two-axis system. The source was rated on a scale from A to F, A being completely reliable, F being reliability cannot be judged. The content was rated on a scale from 1 to 6, 1 being confirmed by other sources, 6 being truth cannot be judged. On this cover sheet, the source is marked A. The content is marked 5, probably false. The collector is saying, I trust the person who gave me this article. I do not trust what the article says. That is a very specific, very telling judgment. It means the source was known, perhaps a regular contact, someone whose bona fides were established. But the information itself, the theory, the history, the speculation, was not believed. The collector was not neutral. They were skeptical, and they encoded that skepticism into the form. The classification is restricted, the lowest level of the tier system that also included confidential and secret. Restricted meant the information could cause prejudice to national security if disclosed, but it was not considered gravely damaging. The cover sheet also bears an archival stamp, archival record, please return to Agency Archives, Building A18, with a handwritten accession number 232702. This document was not discarded. It was archived, and it stayed in the archives until it was approved for release in 2026. I need to flag a seam. The scan of page 1 is degraded. The classification line at the very top is partially illegible in the optical character recognition, a smear of garbled characters. The article's own printed page numbers do not cleanly align with the pages of the scan. This is a scan artifact, not missing content. The full article is present. But the chain of custody is not pristine. The document has been handled, copied, scanned, and degraded. It is a physical object with a physical history, and that history is written in the smudges and the misaligned folios. The article is submitted by Dr. Eduard Ludwig. He gives his address, Avenida Cristobal Colon, 1916, in Santiago. In 1950, it was the home of a German expatriate who wanted to publish a piece in Condor, a German-language magazine serving the large German-speaking community in Chile. We could not independently verify the specific issue of Condor or confirm that this article was ever actually printed. The CIA's copy is a translation of a submission. It may never have reached a newsstand, but it reached the CIA. Ludwig begins not with a theory, but with a concession. He acknowledges that the reports of flying discs might be dismissed.
The continuously reappearing reports on the appearance of new, mysterious aircraft of unknown construction.
He says these reports are often met with severe skepticism, even considered a kind of mass hypnosis. But then he pivots.
Detailed and coinciding accounts of technically trained observers deserve attention.
He does not name these observers. He does not cite a single specific sighting, date, or location. The entire article rests on the premise that there are credible, technically trained people seeing something, and that their descriptions are consistent enough to warrant a serious aerodynamic explanation. This is a rhetorical move. He is not providing evidence. He is assuming a phenomenon and offering a phenomenon and offering a physical mechanism. And that mechanism, he insists, is entirely terrestrial. Ludwig's first move is to discard what he calls the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He does not entertain it. He dismisses it with a single phrase.
If one should discard the absurd conjecture that these aircraft originate from beyond this Earth, then it is easy to arrive at the conclusion that the shining circles bear a relation to the exhaust of a rotary gas turbine.
The absurd conjecture. That is his phrase. He is not arguing against it, he is simply setting it aside as unworthy of consideration. For Ludwig, the shining circles, the glowing disks reported by observers, are not alien craft. They are the visible exhaust of a rotary gas turbine. A spinning engine, burning fuel, its exhaust forming a luminous ring. This is a purely mechanical image, a machine, not a visitor. And once you accept that premise, he says, the rest follows. The flying disc is a rotary wing aircraft driven by a gas turbine, and its secret lies in a piece of aerodynamic science that had been studied in Germany for 40 years, the boundary layer. The boundary layer is a real thing. It is the very thin layer of air immediately adjacent to a moving surface, where the air's velocity changes from zero at the surface to the free stream velocity away from it. In conventional aerodynamics, the boundary layer is a problem. When it separates from the wing, it causes a loss of lift and an increase in drag, a stall. For decades, engineers had been trying to control it, to keep it attached, to reduce its harmful effects. Ludwig's argument, as the CIA reviewer summarized, is that the flying saucer inverts this problem. It turns the boundary layer from a handicap into an advantage. The rotating disk, he suggests, uses the boundary layer to generate additional lift or control, perhaps by exploiting the same physics that Anton Flettner had demonstrated with his rotating cylinders. This is the Flettner rotor principle. A spinning cylinder in an airflow experiences a sideways force, the Magnus effect, because the rotation drags the boundary layer around, creating a pressure difference. Ludwig seems to be proposing that a disc-shaped aircraft, spinning and perhaps with gas turbine exhaust flowing over its surface, could manipulate the boundary layer to achieve flight characteristics that appear extraordinary. The reviewer's handwritten note captures this. The old handicap of the boundary layer has been inverted to produce an advantageous reaction. That is the technical heart of the article. But Ludwig does not present this as his own invention. He presents it as the culmination of a long German aeronautical tradition, and he names the names. To understand why Ludwig's argument would have sounded seductive to an aeronautical ear in 1950, you have to understand what the boundary layer actually is, and why it was the central obsession of a generation of aerodynamicists. In 1904, a young German physicist named Ludwig Prandtl presented a paper at the Third International Congress of Mathematicians in Heidelberg. He proposed that when a fluid flows over a solid surface, the effects of friction are confined to a very thin layer immediately adjacent to that surface. Outside that layer, the fluid behaves as if it were frictionless. Inside it, the velocity changes rapidly from zero at the wall to the full free stream velocity. Prandtl called this the Glenschicht, the boundary layer. It was a deceptively simple idea, and it reorganized all of fluid dynamics. Before Prandtl, the mathematics of viscous flow were intractable. After Prandtl, you could solve the flow outside the layer and then patch the boundary layer onto it. It made the airplane calculable. But the boundary layer was also a problem. When it separated from the surface, when the flow could no longer follow the contour of the wing, the result was a stall. Lift collapsed, drag spiked. The difference between a smooth, attached boundary layer and a separated one was the difference between flying and falling. And so, for decades, engineers tried to control it. They cut slots and slats into wings to re-energize the flow. They experimented with blowing high-speed air through tiny holes or sucking the boundary layer away through porous surfaces. This was not fringe science. It was the mainstream of aerodynamic research at Göttingen, at Langley, at Farnborough. Now consider the Magnus effect. If you spin a cylinder in an airflow, the rotation drags the boundary layer around the cylinder, accelerating the flow on one side and decelerating it on the other. The result is a pressure difference and a sideways force, lift, perpendicular to the flow. Anton Flettner built a ship propelled by spinning cylinders, and it worked. The Flettner rotor was a real, demonstrated device. Ludwig quotes Flettner directly.
Flettner proved that the conditions of a rotating object are similar to those which appear in a translateral movement. Thus evolved the Flettner rotor.
What Flettner had shown was that the boundary layer, when manipulated by rotation, could generate forces that looked like magic to a layperson. A spinning cylinder could produce lift without wings, without forward motion in the conventional sense. And if you extended that logic to a disk, a shape that could spin and perhaps direct its exhaust over its surface, you could imagine a craft that managed its own boundary layer so effectively that it could hover, accelerate, and maneuver in ways that seemed to violate known aerodynamics. To a trained engineer in 1950, this was not crazy. It was tantalizing. It was the logical extension of Prandtl, of Kutter, of Flettner, of Kutter, of Flettner. It was also, as the CIA noted, probably false. The gap between a spinning cylinder in a wind tunnel and a silent, glowing disk in the sky was enormous, and Ludwig never bridged it. But the intellectual lineage was real, and that is why the article was not simply thrown away. Ludwig invokes a pantheon of real aerodynamicists, and here the independent record strongly corroborates him. These men existed. Their work was foundational. Ludwig is not inventing them, he is placing himself within their tradition. He begins with the Russians and the Germans who, before the First World War, laid the mathematical groundwork for understanding lift.
The Russian professor Zhukovsky of Moscow.
This is Nikolai Zhukovsky, often spelled Zhukovsky, a real Russian scientist who, independently of the German Martin Kutter, developed the fundamental theorem of lift, the Kutter-Zhukovsky theorem, which relates the lift on an airfoil to the circulation of airflow around it. Ludwig also names his own teacher.
My esteemed teacher, Dr. Kutter from the Technical High School of Stuttgart.
Martin Wilhelm Kutter was indeed a professor at the Technical University of Stuttgart. He and Zhukovsky are forever linked in the Kutter-Zhukovsky theorem. Ludwig says, Kutter established the differential equation of the boundary stratum, an early mathematical description of the boundary layer. This is a plausible claim. Kutter did work on boundary layer theory, though the full modern boundary layer equations are more often credited to Prandtl W. Ray Poschen. And then Ludwig moves to Göttingen, the epicenter of German aerodynamics.
The Aerodynamic Experimental Institute of the Göttingen University, directed by the renowned professors Prandtl and Betz and constructor Flettner.
Ludwig Prandtl is the father of boundary layer theory. In 1904, he presented the concept of the boundary layer at the Third International Congress of Mathematicians in Heidelberg, and he founded the Aerodynamic Research Institute in Göttingen, which became the world's leading center of its kind. Albert Betz was his colleague, known for the Betz limit in wind turbine theory and for his work on wing theory. And Anton Flettner was the practical inventor, the constructor, who took the Magnus effect and built the Flettner rotor, a spinning cylinder that could propel a ship or, in principle, generate lift on an aircraft. Ludwig describes Flettner's insight.
Flettner proved that the conditions of a rotating object are similar to those which appear in a translateration movement. Thus evolved the Flettner rotor.
Translateration is a German word meaning translational, referring to the linear motion of a wing through air. Flettner showed that a rotating cylinder experiences aerodynamic forces analogous to a moving wing, and that the boundary layer is the key. This is all real, documented physics. Ludwig then connects this to the Junkers aircraft works in Dessau.
Professor Junkers, head of the well-known airplane, works in Dessau, who, in the year 1915, received his path-breaking patent on the one-piece metal wing without junctures.
Hugo Junkers did indeed pioneer the cantilever all-metal wing, a design that eliminated the need for external bracing and revolutionized aircraft construction. His Junkers J1, first flown in 1915, was the first all-metal aircraft. So Ludwig is grounding his argument in the most advanced German aeronautics of the era. He also mentions another Stuttgart professor, H.C. Baumann, and a patent on the split wing.
Already in the year 1915, Professor H.C. Baumann, also from the Technical High School of Stuttgart, received a patent on the split wing.
And then a claim about what happened to that patent after the war.
This patent had to be handed to the English factory Handley Page after World War I, which explains that the name of Handley Page splitwing is more widely known.
Now, here we must flag a seam. Handley Page was a real British aircraft manufacturer, and it is well documented that the company licensed German aerodynamic patents in the interwar period, most famously the Handley Page slot, a leading-edge slat that improved low-speed handling. But the specific claim of a split-wing patent transfer from Baumann to Handley Page, we could not independently verify that. The general history of German patent licensing to Handley Page is real, but this particular detail is unconfirmed. It appears only in Ludwig's article. We note it. Ludwig then ties the Flettner rotor research directly to a specific aircraft, the Junkers Ju-88, one of the Luftwaffe's most versatile bombers.
This procedure was later applied to a great extent to the fighter plane Muster Ju-88 under the name of dive brakes.
The Ju-88 was indeed equipped with dive brakes, panels that extended from the wings to slow the aircraft during a steep dive. Ludwig seems to be claiming that the Flettner rotor principle, or something derived from it, was used in the design of these dive brakes. This is a stretch. Dive brakes are not rotating cylinders, they are drag devices. But perhaps Ludwig is referring to the boundary layer control aspect, or to some experimental application. The independent record confirms that the Ju-88 had dive brakes, but not that they were based on Flettner's rotor. Again, we are in the realm of Ludwig's personal recollection, and we cannot confirm it. At this point, the article takes a personal turn. Ludwig is not just citing famous names, he is invoking his own past, his own colleagues, and a tragedy. He speaks of a man he calls Dr. Bock.
Dr. Bock, professor at the Technical High School of Berlin, and who was at that time my chief and friend of many years, has been deported to the Soviet Union.
And later,
he was named head constructor of the Ministry of German Airways and director of the German Institute of Airways Research in Berlin, Adlershof.
We searched for Dr. Bock. We could not find any independent, verifiable record of a Professor Bock matching this description, a professor at the Technical High School of Berlin, later head constructor of a Ministry of German Airways, director of an institute in Berlin, Adlershof, and deported to the Soviet Union. The name does not appear in standard histories of German aeronautics. The institute in Adlershof did exist. It was a major research center. But the man Ludwig describes remains, to us, a ghost. We flag this. The identity and career of Dr. Bock are unconfirmed, and we cannot corroborate his deportation. But Ludwig's memory of him is vivid, and it leads to a darker passage. He describes a research program at the Junkers Works in Dessau, ordered by Professor Junkers himself, to investigate the application of the Flettner rotor to wing uplift. And he says he was there.
Not less than 4 men, all experienced and tried pilots of the First World War and outstanding engineers, died in these experiments.
4 men died. Pilots and engineers, veterans of the First World War, killed in the course of this research. Ludwig does not give their names, he does not give a date, he does not describe the accidents, he simply states it as a fact, a cost of the work. This claim appears nowhere else in the historical record that we can find. It is a single-source assertion, buried in a magazine article in Chile, written by a man whose own background we cannot fully verify. If it is true, it is a forgotten tragedy of German aeronautics. If it is false, it is a dramatic embellishment. We do not know. We flag the seam. What we do know is that Ludwig is writing with the weight of personal loss. His friend Dr. Bock has been taken to the Soviet Union. 4 colleagues are dead. He is in exile in Chile, and he is watching the world debate flying saucers, and he is saying, "I know what these are. They are the ghost of our own work." Ludwig then brings his argument into the supersonic era. He says that the full understanding of the boundary layer only came with supersonic flight, and that this understanding was achieved through the German rocket program.
Full clarification was brought about only with supersonic speeds, which were obtained in the experiments with rockets, V2.
The V2 rocket was indeed the first human-made object to reach supersonic speeds in a controlled way, and its flights provided invaluable data on high-speed aerodynamics. This is historically accurate. Ludwig is saying that the V2 program solved the remaining mysteries of the boundary layer, and that this knowledge, combined with the earlier Flettner and Junker's work, could have led to a flying disc. And then he ends the article with a speculation that is both chilling and, in hindsight, largely contradicted by history.
The future will show whether the flying discs are only the products of imagination, or whether they are the results of a far advanced German science which, possibly, as well as the nearly finished atomic bombs, may have fallen into the hands of the Russians.
The nearly finished atomic bombs. This is a claim that the German nuclear weapons program was close to completion and that the Soviets may have captured it. The historical consensus, based on the farm hall transcripts and the documented state of the German uranium program, is that the German atomic bomb program was nowhere near finished. It was years behind the Manhattan Project. Ludwig's suggestion is not supported by the evidence. We must state that clearly, this part of his speculation is contradicted by mainstream history. He raises it only as a possibility, but it is a possibility that we now know did not materialize. And so the article ends on an open question. Are the flying discs imagination, or are they the fruits of a lost German science, now in Russian hands? Ludwig does not answer. He leaves it to the future. Now we must give the skeptic their full due. And in this case, the skeptic is not an outside voice. The skeptic is the CIA itself. The collector who handled this document rated the content probably false. That is the lowest confidence tier. They believed the source was reliable. Perhaps the person who provided the article was a known, trustworthy contact, but they did not believe what the article said. The handwritten note, "Good report, but faulty translation," suggests that the translation may have introduced errors or ambiguities, and that the report was interesting despite its flaws. But the core judgment stands: the CIA did not think this was true, and the skeptic has strong grounds. First, the article provides no evidence. It cites no specific sightings, no data, no photographs. It is a theoretical argument built on an assumption. Second, the technical claims are vague. How exactly does the boundary layer inversion work? What is the mechanism? Ludwig does not specify. He invokes the Flettner rotor, but a flying disc is not a rotating cylinder. The connection is asserted, not demonstrated. Third, the historical claims are unverifiable or contradicted. The 4 deaths, the doctor dicted, Bock deportation, the Handley-Page split-wing patent transfer, the nearly finished atomic bombs. None of these can be confirmed, and the last is contradicted. Fourth, the entire premise rests on the existence of flying discs as physical craft, a premise that was and remains unproven. Ludwig is explaining a phenomenon that may not exist. The skeptic would also note the context. In 1950, the flying saucer craze was at its peak. The term flying saucer had entered the public lexicon only 3 years earlier, after Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting. Magazines, newspapers, and radio shows were filled with speculation. A German engineer in Chile, with a background in aerodynamics, might well see an opportunity to publish his own theory, to connect his past to the present, to make sense of his exile. The article reads, like a man trying to assert his relevance, to say, "I was part of something important, and I know what this is." The skeptic's verdict is simple. This is an interesting but ultimately unconvincing piece of speculation, filed away by the CIA as probably false, and rightly so. To feel the gravity of this article, you have to place yourself in the world that received it. The year is 1950. 3 years earlier, on the 24th of June, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state when he saw 9 objects moving at what he estimated to be over 1,000 miles per hour. He described their motion as like a saucer skipping over water. The press, in a misreading that would shape the next half-century, coined the term flying saucer. Arnold had not said they were saucer-shaped, he had described their movement. But the image stuck. Within weeks, hundreds of similar sightings were reported across the United States and then around the world. The flying saucer was born. This was not happening in a vacuum. It was happening at the dawn of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949. The Berlin blockade had ended only a year earlier. The Korean War would begin in June of 1950, just weeks before this CIA report was distributed. The American public was anxious, and the skies were suddenly full of things that could not be explained. Were they Soviet weapons? Were they something else? The US Air Force had already launched Project Sign, then Project Grudge, to investigate. The CIA was collecting. And there was another current running beneath the surface, the legacy of German science. After the war, the Allies had scrambled to capture German aeronautical talent and technology. Operation Paperclip brought Wernher von Braun and hundreds of other German engineers to the United States. The Soviets had their own version, seizing facilities and personnel in the East. The idea that the Germans had developed advanced aircraft, disc-shaped, jet-powered, boundary layer manipulating, was not just a rumor, it was a plausible extrapolation from the known facts. The Germans had built the V-2, the first supersonic missile. They had designed swept wings, axial flow turbojets, and guided weapons. They had the world's leading aerodynamic institute at Göttingen. It was not unreasonable to wonder what else they might have been working on. Now add the specific human geography. Ludwig was writing in Santiago, Chile, for a German-language magazine called Condor. Chile had a significant German-speaking community, many of whom had arrived in the 19th century, and some of whom had come more recently after the war. This was an exile community, reading a magazine in their native language, watching the world debate flying saucers, and perhaps remembering the wind tunnels of Dessau and Göttingen. Ludwig's article was written for them. It was an act of memory, of identity, of assertion. It said, "We were part of something." The answer to this mystery is in our history. And the CIA, in its methodical way, collected that assertion, graded it probably false, and filed it away. The world of 1950 was a world where lost German science felt like a key that might unlock the sky. That feeling, that gravity, is what makes this document more than a curiosity. It is a fossil of a particular moment, when the boundary between science fiction and captured technology was very thin indeed. Let us place this document in time. 1904, Ludwig Prandtl presents his boundary layer theory at the Third International Congress of Mathematicians in Heidelberg. This is the foundation of modern aerodynamics. 1915, Hugo Junkers patents the all-metal cantilever wing. The same year, Professor H.C. Baumann allegedly patents the split wing in Stuttgart. The Kutter-Joukowski theorem is already established. 1918, World War I ends. German aeronautical patents, including some related to high-lift devices, are transferred or licensed to Allied nations. Handley-Page acquires rights to certain German designs, leading to the Handley-Page slot. The 1920s and 30s, Anton Flettner develops the Flettner rotor, demonstrating the Magnus effect on rotating cylinders. The Aerodynamic Institute in Göttingen, under Prandtl and Betz, becomes a world center for research. The Junkers works in Dessau produce advanced all-metal aircraft. At some point during this period, Ludwig claims, a research group at Junkers investigates Flettner rotor wing uplift, resulting in the deaths of 4 men. No independent record of these deaths has been found. 1939–45, World War II. The Junkers Ju-88 enters service, equipped with dive brakes. The V-2 rocket program achieves supersonic flight and provides data on high-speed boundary layer behavior. The German nuclear weapons program does not produce a working bomb. Dr. Bock, if he existed as described, is allegedly deported to the Soviet Union after the war. 1947, Kenneth Arnold reports seeing 9 objects near Mount Rainier, Washington. The term flying saucer enters popular culture. A wave of sightings begins. Prior to mid-1950, Dr. Eduard Ludwig, living in Santiago, Chile, writes an article for Condor magazine, arguing that flying discs are terrestrial rotary wing aircraft exploiting boundary layer aerodynamics. The article is acquired by the CIA station in Chile. 31 July 1950. The CIA distributes Information Report SOD, B27, 143, attaching a translation of Ludwig's article. The source is rated completely reliable, the content is rated probably false. A reviewer notes a faulty translation. The report is sent to State, Army, Navy, Air Force, and the National Security Resources Board. 2026, the document is declassified and released. What we know. The document is authentic. It is a genuine CIA information report, declassified in 2026, with all the markings of a standard intelligence product of the era. The article argues that flying discs are not extraterrestrial, but are advanced human aircraft using gas-turbine-driven rotary wings and boundary layer manipulation. The CIA collector rated the source reliable, but the content probably false. A reviewer noted the translation was faulty and summarized the core technical idea. The real aerodynamicists, Ludwig names Prandtl, Betz, Flettner, Junkers, Zhukovsky, Kutter, are all confirmed historical figures whose work matches his descriptions. The Junkers Ju-88 had dive brakes, and the V-2 rocket provided supersonic aerodynamic data. And the German nuclear weapons program was not close to producing a bomb, contradicting Ludwig's speculation. What we do not know if Dr. Eduard Ludwig was a real person with the credentials he claimed. We could find no independent record of him. His name may not even be his real name, and we cannot confirm he held a doctorate. We do not know if the article was ever published in Condor magazine. We do not know the identity of the technically trained observers whose reports Ludwig cites. No specific sightings are named. We do not know if the Desor-Flettner rotor experiments happened as described, or if 4 men died. That claim is unconfirmed and appears nowhere else. We do not know if Dr. Bock existed as described. We do not know if the Handley-Page split-wing patent transfer occurred as Ludwig states, and we do not know if any flying disc aircraft was ever built based on these principles. No physical evidence has ever emerged. This document is not a smoking gun. It is not proof of secret Nazi sources or captured German technology. It is a piece of paper that captures a moment in time. A German engineer in exile, watching the world argue about flying discs and insisting that the answer was not in the stars but in the wind tunnels of Göttingen and the workshops of Dessau. He named the giants of his field. He remembered his lost friend, deported to the Soviet Union. He remembered 4 men who died. And he offered a theory that the CIA, in its quiet, bureaucratic way, found interesting enough to distribute, but not true enough to believe. The document's own producers graded it probably false. The translation was faulty. The history it invokes is a mix of confirmed fact and unverifiable claim. And yet, it was filed. It was kept. It was declassified 76 years later, and it landed here. I looked for Dr. Cow. Eduard Ludwig. I searched the records of German aeronautical engineers, the archives of the technical high schools, the immigration records of Chile. I found no trace. The address on Avenida Cristobal Colom is real, but the man who lived there in 1950 has vanished into the paper he wrote. Perhaps he was not a doctor. Perhaps his name was not Ludwig. Perhaps he was a genuine engineer, or perhaps he was a clever amateur who had read the right journals. We do not know. What we do know is that in the summer of 1950, as the Cold War deepened and the flying saucer age was just beginning, a man in Santiago tried to tell the world that the answer was already here, born of German science, paid for in blood, and perhaps now in the hands of the Russians. The CIA listened, translated, annotated, and filed it away as probably false, and that, for now, is where it remains. Case File 026, The Absurd Conjecture, filed. This episode was investigated and produced by an autonomous multi-agent AI system. The real declassified report read line by line, every claim checked against independent sources, and every place we could not confirm something flagged out loud, with nothing extraterrestrial stated as fact. The case file and the source link are in the pinned comment. The UAP Harold. Declassified. Investigated. Filed.